The sun had barely begun to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the grand palace courtyard. The evening air was still and cool, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere within the walls of a royal fortress. Inside the palace, everything was as it should be, perfectly arranged, meticulously polished, and quiet, almost too quiet. But there was an unease in the air that only the soldiers and the royal staff seemed to sense. Captain Alaric, a high-ranking officer in the royal guard, paced back and forth in the grand hallway of the palace. His polished armor gleamed in the dim light, his every step purposeful, as if he were preparing for something important. He was not one to show fear, but there was a slight tension in his jaw, the only sign that something was amiss. The guards outside the royal chamber stood at attention, their swords glinting under the pale light. None of them spoke, but their faces betrayed the uncertainty they all felt. Rumors had been circulating about unrest within the kingdom. Whispers of rebellion and treachery had made their way into the palace walls, and the royal family was on edge. But it wasn't just that. There was something more, a feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. Captain Alaric had been ordered to lead a ceremonial salute to the king that evening, an act of loyalty that had been part of the royal protocol for centuries. It was a simple affair, a display of respect and obedience. But tonight it felt different. There was something in the air, something ominous, that made the task feel more than just a formality. Alaric couldn't shake the feeling that this salute would be the beginning of something he couldn't control. At exactly 7 o'clock, the royal horn sounded in the distance, its deep, resonant tones echoing throughout the palace. It was time. Alaric straightened his posture, tightening his grip on his sword. He gave a nod to the guards, signaling them to prepare. The doors to the royal chambers swung open, and Alaric stepped inside, followed by a group of his most trusted men. The king's personal guards stood at attention, but it was clear that something was off. Their eyes flicked nervously toward Alaric as he crossed the room, each step a rhythmic echo that seemed to resonate in the stone walls. The king, sitting on his throne, watched the approaching officer with an unreadable expression. His crown glistened in the dim light, and his eyes were cold, calculating. The room was silent except for the sound of Alaric's footsteps. As the captain reached the throne, he halted and gave a sharp salute, as was customary. The rest of the guards followed suit, their arms raised in perfect synchronization. "Your Majesty," Alaric said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that seemed to fill the room. The king's gaze never wavered. For a moment, there was no response, just the tense silence between them. Then, finally, the king spoke, his voice low but commanding. "Alaric, you know what is expected of you. The salute, it is more than just a gesture. It is a demonstration of loyalty." "I understand, Your Majesty," Alaric replied, his words careful. He had always been loyal, always served with honor, but there was something about the king's tone that unsettled him. The king's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then why does it seem as though you have doubts?" Alaric's heart skipped a beat. Had his unease been noticed? Had the king seen through him? The thought gnawed at him, but he refused to show any sign of weakness. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, his gaze unwavering. "I have no doubts, Your Majesty," Alaric said firmly, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. The king leaned forward in his throne, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. The silence stretched between them, and Alaric's thoughts began to race. He could feel the eyes of the guards on him, could feel the weight of their expectations, but it was the king who held all the power. And right now, the king's gaze was like ice. "You say you have no doubts, Captain," the king said slowly. "But I sense something different. You've been distant, on edge. Do you still consider yourself loyal to me? To the crown?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alaric's mind whirled. Was this a test? A challenge? The king's voice had taken on a sharp edge, one that suggested the loyalty of his men might no longer be taken for granted. Alaric could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had served the king for years, had protected the royal family with his life, and now, here he was, facing a question that could shatter everything he'd worked for. "I am loyal to the crown, Your Majesty," Alaric said, his voice steady, though his insides churned. The king did not respond immediately. He sat back in his throne, his expression unreadable. Then, with a flick of his hand, he gestured to one of the royal guards standing nearby. The guard, a young man with sharp features, stepped forward, his eyes full of nervous anticipation. "Bring me the royal seal," the king commanded. The guard hesitated for a moment before rushing off toward the back of the chamber, his footsteps echoing through the silence. Alaric watched him go, his mind racing. What was this about? Why the sudden demand for the royal seal? The tension in the room seemed to rise with every passing second, each beat of the clock louder than the last. Alaric's grip tightened on his sword as he waited. He could hear the sound of the guard returning, but it felt like an eternity before the young man reappeared, holding the royal seal in his hands. The king took the seal from the guard and held it up in the dim light, his eyes glinting with something almost malicious. He turned his gaze to Alaric, and for the first time, Alaric saw a flicker of something other than cold calculation in the king's eyes, something darker, something that made his blood run cold. "Captain," the king began, his voice now tinged with menace, "I've heard rumors, whispers of rebellion, of treason, and I have come to a conclusion." Alaric's heart raced. Could it be? Could the king have discovered something? But no, he was loyal. He had done nothing to betray his king. "I will give you one chance to prove your loyalty, Alaric," the king continued, his voice dangerously calm. "You will make a vow to defend the crown, no matter the cost. You will swear it before me, before all of your men, and you will seal it with your blood." Alaric's eyes widened. This was not what he had expected. This was no simple salute, it was a demand. The king was testing him, pushing him to the brink. He could not refuse. To do so would mean treason. To accept would be to bind himself in ways he could not yet fathom. But before Alaric could respond, the young guard who had fetched the royal seal stepped forward, a look of confusion on his face. "Your Majesty," the guard said, his voice shaking, "there is something you must know. The royal seal, it's gone." The words struck the room like a thunderclap. The king's eyes snapped to the guard, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. The guard's face had gone pale, and he looked utterly horrified. It's missing, Your Majesty," the guard stammered. "We've searched the entire chamber, but it's gone. Vanished." The king's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing into slits. "How dare you?" But before he could finish, another voice spoke from the shadows, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was never meant to be found. The room fell deathly silent. The voice was familiar, yet it carried an unnatural resonance, a presence that filled the space with an almost tangible weight. All eyes turned to the source of the voice, and Alaric's breath caught in his throat. From the darkness, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in shadows, and moving with an eerie grace. It was a woman, but not one Alaric recognized. Her face was hidden beneath a dark veil, and her movements were fluid, like a predator stalking its prey. The air around her seemed to ripple with power. "Who are you?" the king demanded, his voice trembling with rage. The woman's smile was barely visible, a twisted expression of amusement. "I am the one who holds the truth," she said cryptically. "The one who knows what you have done." Alaric's mind raced. What was happening? What did this woman know? And why did her presence fill him with a sense of dread? The king's eyes flicked toward Alaric, suspicion mounting. But before he could speak, the woman's words cut through the air once again. "You've been deceived, Your Majesty," she said softly, but her voice carried a weight that could not be ignored. "And now, you will face the consequences of your choices." The tension in the room was unbearable. Alaric stood frozen, unsure of what to do. His loyalty had always been to the crown, but now it seemed that the very foundation of his loyalty was being called into question. And in that moment, he realized something that would haunt him forever. The royal guard was not just a group of men tasked with protecting the king. They were pawns in a game far larger than they had ever imagined. Alaric had a choice to make. Alaric's mind raced, caught between the eerie woman's cryptic words and the mounting pressure from the king. He stood rigid, like a statue carved from stone, unable to fully process what had just unfolded before him. The guard was still trembling by the throne, and the room was thick with the ominous silence that followed her arrival. The woman's words reverberated in Alaric's mind. "You've been deceived. Face the consequences of your choices." What was she talking about? He had served the king faithfully for years, never once faltering, never once questioning his duty. But now, as the tension in the air grew heavier with each passing second, Alaric could feel the ground beneath him shifting. The solid foundation of his loyalty began to crack. His thoughts spun in circles. Was he really loyal, or was he simply blind to the truth? The king, seething with rage, turned his burning gaze upon the figure who had appeared from nowhere, as if her sudden materialization itself was a sign of some greater, hidden force. "You dare speak of deception in my own court?" The king's voice thundered, echoing off the high stone walls of the chamber. The veins on his neck were bulging, and his eyes were dark with fury. "Who are you? What is it you want?" The woman's lips curled into a smirk, and she slowly stepped forward. Her movements were calculated, precise, almost deliberate, as if she were savoring the moment. Her cloak, as black as night, whispered like a shadow against the stone floor as she approached the king. "What I want, your majesty," she said, her voice cool and smooth, "is for you to finally open your eyes." The king recoiled slightly, as if the woman's words had struck him physically. "You think you can come here and lecture me? You have no power in this palace. You are nothing." The woman tilted her head, her eyes glinting with something dark, something Alaric could not quite place. She raised a hand slowly, and in an instant the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The guards near the walls stiffened, their breaths catching in their throats. Even Alaric, though trained in years of battle and discipline, felt a cold chill creeping into his bones. It was as if the woman's mere presence exuded an otherworldly energy that sent a shiver through the very fabric of the palace. "I may be nothing in your eyes, but I know truths you cannot even begin to fathom." Her voice was now quiet, almost intimate. "You think you rule this kingdom, your majesty. You think your bloodline holds power. But it is all a facade, a lie constructed to keep all of you, in the dark." The king's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a thin line. "Enough. Speak plainly, or I will have you thrown into the dungeons for such insolence." But the woman did not flinch. Instead, she smiled, the curve of her lips impossibly serene, as though the threat did not faze her in the slightest. She took another step forward, now standing within arm's reach of the king. "The truth, your majesty, is that your kingdom is rotting from the inside. And you, Captain Alaric, you are the key to it all." The mention of his name, spoken with such certainty, caused Alaric's heart to race. He glanced nervously at the woman, who seemed to see right through him. She had a knowing look in her eyes, and for a moment, Alaric felt as though she had already read the very depths of his soul. His loyalty to the king, his entire purpose, it all seemed suddenly fragile, as if it could crumble under the weight of her gaze. The king, his brow furrowing, looked from the woman to Alaric, clearly trying to piece together what was happening. "What do you mean by that?" The king's voice trembled, though he was too proud to admit it openly. "Alaric is my most trusted captain. He has served me faithfully. What are you insinuating?" The woman chuckled darkly, the sound echoing eerily through the cold chamber. "Alaric does not serve you, your majesty. Not in the way you think. He serves something far greater than this kingdom. His true loyalty has always been elsewhere, hidden beneath the surface. His purpose, his true purpose, is intertwined with something you've long forgotten." Alaric felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. What was she talking about? The words made no sense. He had served the king all his life. He had given everything, his sweat, his blood, his very soul. His father had served the crown, and his grandfather before him. They had fought and bled for this kingdom. The woman seemed to read his confusion and smiled again, a wicked, knowing smile that made Alaric's stomach churn. "Do you remember, Captain, the ancient pact?" she asked softly. "The pact made long before your ancestors even dreamed of power. The pact that binds you and this kingdom to something far older, far darker than you know." Alaric's mind snapped back to the stories he had heard as a child. The ancient tales whispered in the quiet corners of the palace. Stories that had always seemed like little more than folklore. But now, as the woman's words lingered in the air, those stories seemed far more real. A pact made in the kingdom's distant past. An agreement that tied the royal bloodline to an ancient, secret force. It was said to have granted the kingdom its strength, its prosperity. But at what cost? The king's expression was one of disbelief, and Alaric could see the hint of fear now, barely concealed behind the royal mask. "What nonsense is this?" the king spat, his face flushing with anger. "There is no pact. There is no dark force. You are nothing but a liar." But the woman's eyes never left Alaric. "You can deny it all you like, your majesty. But the truth remains." She turned to face Alaric fully now, her voice lowering to a whisper that seemed to echo in the depths of his mind. "You are the key to breaking the cycle, to undoing what your ancestors set in motion. You are the one who can choose to stop it or let it continue." Alaric's heart thudded in his chest as the room seemed to close in around him. The weight of her words was suffocating. He had always thought of himself as a loyal soldier, unwavering in his duty. But now, doubt seeped in like poison. What if everything he had believed was wrong? What if his loyalty had been a lie, carefully cultivated by the very system he had sworn to protect? "Alaric," the king's voice was shaky now, a far cry from the commanding tone he had used just moments ago. "What is she talking about? What does she mean? What is this pact?" But Alaric didn't answer. His mind was a whirlwind, his thoughts scattered, unable to focus on any one thing. The woman's words played over and over in his head, each repetition making him feel more and more disconnected from the man he had always been. Could it be true? Was there something more, something darker, hidden in the past of the royal family? Something that had shaped him, something that he was bound to? The woman stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "The choice is yours, Captain. You can stand by and continue to serve the crown, as you have always done, allowing the darkness to grow, to fester. Or you can break the cycle, destroy the foundation upon which this kingdom is built." Alaric's breath caught in his throat. The air around him seemed to thicken, his skin tingling with the weight of the decision that lay before him. Everything he had known, everything he had fought for, it could all come crashing down. The very foundation of his existence seemed to be crumbling beneath his feet. The woman's gaze softened, almost as if she pitied him. "But know this, Captain, no matter what you choose, the kingdom will change. There will be consequences. Nothing will ever be the same." Alaric turned to face the king, but the king's face was unreadable. The man who had once been a father figure to him, the one who had given him purpose, was now a stranger, his eyes cold and distant. Alaric was torn. His heart yearned for loyalty, for duty, but his mind screamed for truth, for freedom. The woman was offering him something powerful, something that could change everything. But at what cost? The choice hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. And in that moment, Alaric realized that he had never been in control. His entire life he had been a pawn, unknowingly bound to forces greater than himself. And now, the time had come for him to make the most important decision of his life. The room held his breath, and Alaric knew that the fate of the kingdom, and his own, rested in his hands. Alaric's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like an invisible force, suffocating his breath. His mind felt as though it were splitting in two. He had lived his entire life serving the king, a life of honor and duty. But the woman's words were unraveling everything he thought he knew about his existence. The kingdom, the royal bloodline, the oaths he had sworn, all of it could be based on a lie crafted over generations to keep them trapped in a cycle of power that had little to do with the ideals of justice or nobility he had once believed in. The very foundation of everything he had fought for was beginning to crumble, piece by piece, and in its place, there was an unsettling void that threatened to swallow him whole. The king, still seated on his throne, was visibly shaken. His eyes darted between Alaric and the woman, disbelief etched across his face. The authority that had once been unshakable in the king's posture now seemed to falter, and Alaric could feel the shift in the air. The woman was right about one thing. Nothing would ever be the same. Not for the kingdom, and certainly not for Alaric. The woman's gaze remained locked on Alaric, and he could feel the weight of her stare as if she were reading his very soul. "You have a choice," she said again, her voice cool and dispassionate. But there was an undeniable power behind her words. "Your loyalty has always been to the crown, but what if the crown itself is the source of the suffering? What if everything you've been taught, everything you've believed, is a lie designed to keep you and this kingdom in the dark?" Alaric's mind spun with conflicting thoughts. Could he really trust this woman, this mysterious figure who seemed to appear out of nowhere, offering him a path that felt both dangerous and liberating? How could he betray everything he had known, everything he had fought for? The king had always treated him as a trusted ally, a loyal soldier. But now, standing here, facing the woman's piercing gaze and hearing the words that cut through him like a blade, Alaric couldn't help but wonder if he had been a fool all along. The woman continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not ask you to abandon your loyalty, Captain. I ask you to open your eyes, to see the truth of what has been hidden from you. You do not need to serve this system, this kingdom that has been built on falsehoods. You are not a slave to the crown, Captain. You are your own man, with the power to change the course of history." The king's voice interrupted, desperate and tinged with a faint edge of panic. "Enough of this nonsense. This is treason. I will not be intimidated by some sorceress who seeks to manipulate my captain." He stood abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. "Alaric, I demand you take control of this situation. Guard, arrest her." But Alaric didn't move. His feet were glued to the ground, his mind paralyzed by the storm of questions and doubts that raged within him. His whole life had been devoted to the king, and yet in this moment, with the woman's words echoing in his ears, it all seemed so small. What was the king's true role in this world? Was his authority real, or was it just a part of the same lie the woman spoke of? He glanced over at the trembling royal guards, who were now looking between each other, unsure whether to obey the king's command or to simply stay out of the way. It was as though the room itself had become a battleground, with loyalties torn, with power shifting and crumbling. The woman took another step forward, her eyes never leaving Alaric's face. She was so close now that he could feel the chill emanating from her like an icy breeze. "The time for indecision is running out, Captain. The kingdom is teetering on the edge of destruction. You can stop it. You can break the chain of darkness that has bound this land for centuries. But only if you choose to stand against the forces that have ruled over you, over everyone." The king's voice, though still commanding, had lost some of its strength. "You will not turn my captain against me, sorceress. He will follow his true king, or he will suffer the consequences of his betrayal." Alaric's eyes flicked from the king's angry face to the woman's calm, inscrutable expression. His heart was a storm of emotions, fear, anger, confusion. But beneath it all, there was something else. Something deep within him that had been quietly gnawing at his soul for years. A sense of unease, a feeling that had always been there, lurking beneath the surface. The woman had spoken of the pact, of the darkness that had always been part of the royal bloodline, and something in his gut told him she was telling the truth. What if his loyalty to the king was misplaced? What if the very thing he had sworn to protect was the root cause of all the suffering in the kingdom? Could it be that he had been serving the wrong master all along? The tension in the room thickened, the air growing heavy with anticipation. The woman took a final step toward him, her eyes locking with his. "Alaric," she whispered, "the choice is yours. You do not have to serve a king who rules by bloodshed and deceit. You have the power to reshape this kingdom, to free the people from the tyranny of the past. You are the key to breaking the curse." Alaric felt a surge of emotion rise up within him, anger, frustration, and above all, a deep sense of betrayal. For the first time, he realized that the king's authority had never truly been about honor or justice or the good of the people. It had been about power, And the king had used him, just as he had used so many others, to further his own agenda. The king's voice broke through the haze of thoughts in Alaric's mind. Alaric, do not listen to her. She is nothing but a false prophet, a charlatan who seeks to undermine your loyalty. You know what I have done for this kingdom, for this throne. I have kept the peace. I have protected our people. Alaric's gaze slowly shifted back to the king, and for the first time, he truly saw the man in a new light. The king's words, once a source of comfort and authority, now sounded hollow. The peace he spoke of had come at a cost that had never been fully acknowledged. The lives of countless men and women had been sacrificed in the name of that peace. And Alaric had been complicit in it all. The woman's words echoed in his mind again. You have the power to reshape this kingdom. You are the key to breaking the curse. He looked back at the woman, and this time there was no hesitation in his eyes. What must I do? He asked, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. The woman's lips curled into a smile of triumph, of victory. It is simple. You must make the choice to sever the ties that bind you to this kingdom. You must stand against the king and break the pact that has cursed this land for centuries. Only then can you truly be free. Alaric nodded, feeling a strange sense of clarity wash over him. He knew what he had to do. The king's face contorted with rage as Alaric stepped away from him. The very symbol of loyalty now turned against him. You are a fool, Alaric, a traitor to the crown. You will regret this. You will regret turning your back on everything you've known. Alaric's eyes hardened, and he drew his sword. It was the weapon that had served him through countless battles, the weapon that had defended the kingdom. But today, it was no longer a tool of loyalty to a king who had used him. Today, it was the weapon that would shatter the chains of deception. With a single stroke, Alaric severed the royal insignia from his tunic. It fell to the floor with a dull thud, the emblem of the kingdom lying in the dust at his feet. The king's face paled as the weight of Alaric's betrayal sank in. You have doomed us all. Alaric turned to face the woman, who was watching him with approval. I am free, he said, his voice unwavering. And with that, he stepped away from the throne, leaving behind the life he had known. The fate of the kingdom, and his own, was no longer tied to the lies of the past. It was in his hands now, and whatever happened next, he would face it as a free man. As he walked away from the throne room, the sounds of the kingdom's fate echoed behind him, a distant reminder of the choice he had made.